To Dr. Akmal's YouTube channel, and today we're going to be discussing coronavirus and dealing with grief due to the number of fatalities that we're seeing. Dr. Akmal, what is the situation currently as we're seeing it?
In terms of numbers, for the first time, it is hitting Western Europe and the rest of the world that hundreds and thousands of people are dying every day. Some parts of the world have become more tuned to it in terms of war, civil war, physical strife, famine, and so on, because that's what we've heard. But parts of the world which were presumed immune at this moment in time are being devastated by that. So there is that change where the developed world at this particular moment in time, especially Europe and now the United States of America and North America, not so much as South America, not so much Africa at the moment, but these developed countries are experiencing a massive surge of death. So something that was unheard of, as I said in my last interview, that these are societies which are not accustomed to masses of people dying on a daily basis. These are societies which pride themselves because of law and order or policing and so on, and murders are discouraged and law enforcement is idealized and so on. So societies in Europe have always been, in the last 30 years, reasonably safe. COVID-19 has actually has been a game changer. There are European countries like Spain, Italy, even in England, hundreds and hundreds of people are dying, 500, 600, 700. So the prediction, which varies from previously 6,000 to 250,000, now stands between 20,000 and 120,000. So it all depends on what happens with the advent of corona in its second phase. And there are people are saying that there may be a surge. Now, if this surge is going to happen, and what we are already experiencing, people in Europe, especially in Britain, have to now start thinking about confronting grief and bereavement. Bereavement and grief has been an expectation in certain factions of society. So what happens is that in parts of England where you have the elderly population, there is an expectation that people in their 90s, late 80s, there are so many people in their 100th years in England. So there is that expectation of the natural death. But of course, this is totally different. There is the expectation that the elderly are more vulnerable, but now the expectation that anybody can die. There has been very young deaths of weeks and in teens. So it is an extremely distressing situation for any society, which is confronting a real existential threat to its physical constituency and its psychological construct. So because we are confronting it now, we need to be looking at grief. But this is going to be a different grief. It is not going to be a grief which is natural, in the sense that it is not that you will get to prepare for the funeral. You will have time, like many people have in chronic illness, or even in accidents which are unexpected. You are able to have some time with your loved one in terms of their body. You're able to have them prepared for the funeral. You're able to visit them in the funeral parlor. You're able to mix up with an extended family. You're able to discuss them and talk about them in with their friends. And what happens is that there is a surge of understanding and support available when there is that normal pattern of grief expression. But now the grief is going to attack and is hitting, but it is going to be a grief which is going to be solitary. And I mean solitary for the individual and solitary for the family.
Some people can't even attend the funerals.
And that is exactly the point, that when the person is in the intensive care, you can't meet with them, you can't see them, you're completely isolated from them, they're isolated from you. Obviously, they are in a bad way, so they may not be entirely aware when on a ventilator what is going on in terms of sedation and anesthesia. But as far as you are concerned, you're on tenterhooks and you're constantly wondering what's going to happen. And God forbid, if the loved one passes away, then many people, many close loved ones will not be attending the funeral. And if the person is infected, it is very difficult to attend.
Absolutely, that's what we saw. That's what we've been seeing being reported in the news. So then, how would you, what would you say to the people who are unfortunately going through this grief? And
yes, I would say that there has to be a slight transformation in grief in England. Why I would say that, and maybe everywhere else, grief in England has been a very intrapersonal process. That it has been focused on the individual. Whoever approaches the services of advice, they are the ones who get it. And the approach has always been the individual's health. I think the time has come to look at it as an interpersonal process, especially in this time. And
what do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that there are now families which are confined. So while we see a slight increase in domestic violence, we see increase in applications for divorce, but I'm sure there are so many thousands and hundreds of thousands of unreported improvements in relationships, people learning to live with each other. And I'm sure that there are hundreds of thousands of relationships where people have gelled together. And because now small families are also isolated together, if they are confronted with potential grief or bereavement, it has to be a process which is interpersonal and not intrapersonal. It cannot be addressed to the most devastated, or you presume that the person is, the spouse may be the one which is more devastated, or a favorite child, son or daughter may be. So it has to be a process which is more shared. Now here I would say that Asian cultures have always had that. They've always had this extended support, and families are generally larger and they are very close-knit. So they would understand it easier and better. But I think it requires a degree of understanding in the Western culture, which has been individualized and individual-led. Right. So it has to be now a collective process. Whether you are 2 or 3 or 5 in a household, you all need to approach grief as if it's a shared loss.
Okay, wonderful. So, how, as a psychiatrist and having dealt with so many people from different continents, different backgrounds, Asian, African, European, North American, so on, what advice would you give to people to make that, find the way to make it a joint thing?
Okay. So, first thing is that modern life is a constant battle against unhappiness and a constant battle against mortality. So people are constantly wanting to look young, constantly wanting to be young,
Live forever.
and do, stuff which is younger, which they could do in the younger years, etc. But the thing is that time is not going to relent. So however much you may want to do it, or I may want to do it, the time is going to catch up. So the important thing is that one needs to now start to cognitively and deliberately think that I or somebody else may not survive this spell of the pandemic. So I think mortality has to be embraced now, that you need to be prepared, that you may be the victim. That is, in my view, the first step. Because unless you, sorry.
But if you're not used to thinking like that, how are you? This is a very troubling time, I assume.
As we have been inviting people to think so many different things in these series of discussions, I think it is very important to start the beginning of the process of embracing mortality.
So how would you say we would do that?
So I would say that first thing is 600, 700, 800 people are dying every day in a country where that was not the case. These are people who are dying of an illness which afflicts you without any awareness or notice. It could be touching something, touching your face that leads to it, or just getting a piece of paper from somebody that may cause it. So I would suggest that it is very important now to start to say to yourself that I may not survive this wave.
So isn't that about feeding into the grief and panic that we were discussing earlier?
Now, the thing is that if you accept it, that there is a possibility, there's no panic.
But if you're taking all the precautions, then why should you think like that?
Okay? So you don't want to. So what I'm saying
I'm just putting it forward that I'm just being devil's advocate. It might be quite a morbid, it's a morbid thing to say, really.
No, but the thing is, we are dealing with morbidity here.
Yeah.
I mean, COVID is a morbidity. So when you're looking at morbidity, you have to look at mortality. And these are two integral steps happening with COVID. Now, let me give you a little sophistication in what I've suggested. The nuance here is that you don't want it to happen, but you are saying to yourself, I don't want it to happen. I want to survive it. I'm taking all the precautions, but the chances, there is a chance, there is a 3 in 100 chance. It is not a 3 in 10 million chance. It's not a 3 in a billion chance. It's a 3 in 100 chance that I may not survive it. If that is the case, then I need to be looking at the possibility that I or somebody very close to me may not be there in the coming weeks and months. And I think that when PM Boris Johnson said that, that was a good statement.
So then that's the thing. So the reality is out there. So the ones avoiding it maybe going into denial about the situation.
Mm-hmm.
But we know the severity because the facts have been put out by all the different official bodies. Okay, so now then let's start. So you start telling us on how to deal with the grief. So let's continue with that. So
Okay.
other ways to handle it or deal
No,
with
I
it.
think that the first is preparation of your own mind.
Okay.
And so if you do not prepare your mind cognitively, you do not prepare your mind emotionally, you're not going to be able to uh, prepare in any way, because it is something which is so unreal to you, so foreign to you, that you are not going to accept that you're a potential victim, that you may not be there or a loved one may not be there. So the first step is that the arrangement, as I said, that in terms of grief, it has to be now going to be a familial grief process where everybody needs to think that if we confront grief, how am I going to help the other loved ones, or how they are going to help, you know.
So how would they help?
Okay. Now, I think that after having realized these two, the two prerequisites, the first being that it is going to be a collective effort, the 3 to 5 people or 7 people. So whatever number of people that you have in the household, the first thing is that we are going to deal with it together. Then, when you are prepared yourself cognitively, not in a fatalistic manner, not in a defeatist manner, that you want to fight it, you want to avoid it, but you are accepting of the fact that you could be one of those statistics.
Or anyone we know could be.
Or anybody that you love and care for.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that once these two things have been absorbed and you have mentally chewed them a little on them for a while, thought about it, the step is now, and I'm talking of the preventative part, where grief doesn't strike you as a surprise. There is always going to be shock. And this is what I wanted to say, was that grief, according to certain authors, have different stages. I do not believe that those stages are like 1, 2, 3, 4. There are, different states which may last from a day to a year to a number of years, months to weeks or whatever. So the first stage that people talk about and have suggested is shock, right? So you never expected it. Suddenly somebody's afflicted with it and the person has gone. This is shock. And I would suggest that that shock is then addressed when you do two bits of work. First is this preventative or this preparatory work, in which now, because as society, we are confronting this challenge, we should start talking with each other in the family who are confined, that look, this is a very difficult scenario. We need to prepare ourselves for it. Maybe, we will do our best effort to survive it, but there is a possibility that we may not be able to survive it. So then what should we do? And if that is what happens, then what I would suggest is that we need to now start talking about it.
Okay.
When we start talking about it, then many ideas will come and many stages of acceptance will come. If somebody has chewed on this thought for some time and is more prepared, and that person then offers that as a discussion to the family, Then, if there are 3 people or 5 people, there'll be these 3 to 5 people at different stages of acceptance or denial.
Okay, so that's actually quite a bold move as well. But the shock will always be there, no matter what.
Yes.
Even if you prepare, even if you don't. But anyway, we actually run out of time for today's discussion, but we are going to continue this because we've only touched upon the grief elements. And like you said, this was just one of the stages we discussed. But do join us again.
Well, actually, this is one of the preparatory pre-stage.
Yes, exactly.
Not actually a stage, yes.
So,
and I think that if people have any questions,
yes,
we're very happy to answer them and address them. If we don't have the answer, at least there'll be some idea
exactly
that we can
and open that conversation and dialogue, and maybe others will be able to give more insight. Anyway, thank you very much, and we will see you guys very soon.